Today we are breaking down a pretty wild life philosophy. It comes from Maciej Filipkowski, a guy who climbed to the absolute peak of the corporate world. We're talking managing 27 countries for a tech giant, and then just walked away from it all. So this is our explainer on how he did it, how he designed a life on his own terms, and yeah, the counterintuitive hot takes he learned along the way.
And really, this quote is the key to the whole thing. Maciej's story is just a perfect modern-day example of what this actually means. It's all about that switch that flips in your brain when you suddenly realize that the game you've been playing, well, it might not be the only game in town.
All right, let's get into it. We're going to start where he started, at what most people would consider the absolute pinnacle of success. You know, a place so comfortable, so secure, it's basically a beautiful prison. So yeah, this was his world. He was the head of Dell for a huge chunk of the globe, a massive territory stretching all the way from Poland to Kazakhstan. Just try to picture that for a second. The power, the prestige, the constant first-class travel. He was, by any definition, a massive corporate success. But here's the crazy part. When he was thinking about leaving, the question that kept him up at night wasn't about losing the money or the power. No, it was this: what will I put on my business card now? His entire identity was so wrapped up in that title that an empty business card was literally terrifying. I mean, that really shows you just how deep the golden cage can go, right? So how do you actually break out of a cage like that? Well, this next part is all about the moment he finally pulled the trigger and the absolutely shocking lesson he learned about his own value in the process. So after exactly a decade with the company, he was done. He was just fed up with the rigid corporate rules, and he had this burning desire to be financially independent. So, on his 10-year anniversary, August 17th, he hit send on that email. Simple: I resign.
And you gotta hear this. The company's response? A 70% raise. And that executive promotion he'd been chasing for 10 years? They pushed it all through in 48 hours. The biggest takeaway here is just insane. His true value was only revealed the second he was ready to walk out the door.
And this, right here, is the first major hot take from his story. So often, we just accept the reality we're handed without ever, testing the boundaries. By being willing to leave, he found a ceiling he never even knew was there. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of us are living inside a box without ever just pushing on the walls to see if they're real?
He did eventually leave for good, but freedom, well, it didn't look anything like he imagined. The life of an entrepreneur turned out to be absolutely brutal. It was just a non-stop series of painful, humbling failures.
I mean, just look at this timeline. He spent 7 years meticulously planning his escape. But the reality? Total chaos. His very first investment wiped him out completely. Another one ended with his friends betraying him. It seemed like for every one win, there were just multiple, painful losses. His whole carefully built plan just went up in smoke.
And it all came down to this moment, his absolute lowest point. Just imagine that, going from this high-flying CEO lifestyle to making this phone call. A 48-year-old man with newborn twins at home having to ask his dad for money just to live day to day. This wasn't some strategic setback. This was rock bottom.
But, it's often from that lowest point that the biggest breakthroughs happen. And for Maciej, the transformation was triggered by a moment where he quite literally stared death in the face.
He was on a trip in Sicily and he caught COVID. But it wasn't even the virus itself that nearly got him. It was his body's autoimmune response. His own system just decided to attack him. And for 4 straight days, doctors fought to keep him alive. He said that every time he fell asleep, he truly didn't know if he was going to wake up again.
And as he's lying there in that hospital bed, this was the thought that made everything click. Not about his career, not about the money he lost, but this profound, simple regret of being on a beautiful island and not even getting to see the ocean. And that's when he finally understood. The real reward in life isn't status, it's not achievement, it's experience.
So this near-death experience basically became the bedrock of his entire philosophy. So now, let's break down the core principles he lives by. This is his framework for designing a life that's actually truly your own.
Okay, so Maciej explains this with this really powerful chessboard metaphor. He says society, your family, your job, whatever, they hand you a chessboard and they say, play chess. But his point is totally radical. You don't have to play their game. You can play checkers on it. You can decide to play with dice. Heck, you can flip the board upside down and start scoring goals with the pieces. The board is just a platform. The game you play on it is entirely up to you.
And here is another huge hot take. It's a Polish saying that roughly translates to make a sail from a hump. The whole idea is that the things we see as our biggest weaknesses, our insecurities, our weird needs, our humps, are actually our greatest source of power. If you can understand what's really driving that insecurity, you can turn that hump into a sail and use that energy to push you forward. So, how do you actually do any of this? Well, the whole process starts with what he calls a brutally honest internal audit. First, you have to just listen. Really listen to that constant conversation that's always going on in your head. And once you start to hear it, you can begin asking the right questions, not what you think you should want, but what you truly deeply desire and what you're most afraid of. And he argues that pretty much your entire life is shaped by the answers to just these 3 questions. Seriously, think about it. Where you live, who you share your life with, and what you do every day. Those 3 choices dictate something like 90% of your reality. The key, he says, is to make these decisions on purpose, not just to let them happen to you. And all of this leads to his final and maybe his most counterintuitive hot take of all. He says we have to stop obsessing over this question. Because asking, what do you want to achieve? It frames life like a checklist of goals, a bunch of mountains you have to conquer. But, what happens when you get to the top of the last mountain?
Instead, he says we should be asking this. This question isn't about achievement, it's about identity. It's not a destination, it's a direction. It means that life is this continuous, ongoing process of becoming something new, of evolving. It's a huge shift from playing a finite game of winning to playing an infinite game of growth. And that is a really powerful thought to leave you with. Who would you still like to become?